All right. So I think we should be starting. So welcome to everybody who is watching this. My name is Eddie Davis. I am a member of the ICT Pro TT Committee, Chamber of Commerce, TNT Chamber of Commerce ICT Committee. Thanks for attending this webinar. You would have received information on the content and the speakers. If you want further information, is posted in the description of this video. The video is going to be saved for future reference, so feel free to share it anytime. It'll be there for your enjoyment. So let's get started. I wanted to start with some guidelines on the conversation today. Well, first of all, let me just make sure through some form of show of hands that you are hearing me right now. Can I get some kind of reaction to this? Let's see, I get a yes. And guys in the group there, Ulrich or Matthew, can you hear me clearly?
Eddie, we're hearing you loud and clear.
Good. So let's get started. So the rules of engagement. Each presenter is going to present between 15 and 20 minutes presentation, followed by a Q&A. So we encourage you to ask questions. If you look at the chat on the right-hand corner of the YouTube screen, you would see a chat that we encourage you to use to ask questions that we will pass on to our presenters, and they'll be able to answer. Anything that is not covered here today, or any questions we don't have time to cover, we will encourage you as well to have offline discussions with the participants to this event, myself, Robert, or Matthew. Contact information is in the description below. So what we will talk about today. We will be talking about, we will be talking to local entrepreneurs and developers who've had an experience in developing e-commerce site and service. So it'll be very hands-on. We will be comparing the local tools and methods versus other tools and services available outside of Trinidad. To make sure that everybody is up to speed with the fundamentals of e-commerce, we will be talking about today the standard credit card online acquiring method. So typically, a user using a credit card information goes through a web service provided by typically a developer, a website designed by a developer, that connects to payment processor. That payment processor interfaces with or transacts with the bank account of the merchant, the owner of the website usually, and transacts with Visa and MasterCard. These are the key components in any transaction. Some of these are done real time, some of these are done offline, but basically any e-commerce architecture includes web front end, mobile app or web, a payment processor, a bank account for the merchant, and connection to the credit card providers. So what are the key differences between Trinidad and the rest of the world, and what implication does it have, and how does that guide our discussion? So first of all, credit card adoption. In Trinidad, we're talking about a 15% of the population which has a credit card, which is relatively low. The rest of the world, depending on where you're looking, it's over 50%. So the population we're targeting when we're talking about e-commerce, unfortunately, in Trinidad alone, is relatively small. The debit card environment in Trinidad is managed and owned by Links, InfoLink. That organization is guided by the banks that are part of that organization, so the 6 banks in Trinidad. The rest of the world leverages the Visa and MasterCard infrastructure. So different infrastructure, different control. What this means is in Trinidad and Tobago, these kind of transactions are centralized and driven by local banks. And a third important difference between Trinidad and the rest of the world is the relationship between the banks and merchants. In Trinidad, the standard is that the banks deal directly with merchants, whether they are stores, virtual or physical stores. In the rest of the world, ISOs are intermediaries between banks and merchants, which allows a fair amount more innovation in those countries, while in Trinidad, the innovation that tends to appear to service merchants is controlled and managed by banks. So with that said, with the environment and the frame of references set, I'm going to pass on the conversation to Matthew. Matthew, who has developed and commercialized services that you may be familiar with. I'll let him talk about that, and more importantly, talk about his experience in using local infrastructure and local services to develop e-commerce services.
Okay, thanks, Eddie. Let me just set up here. Okay, can you all see that? Are you able to see the presentation?
Yes.
Yep, okay, so let's go. Hi, everyone. So I'm Matthew. I co-founded Ticktr. We started development back in 2013, and we launched late 2014. So hopefully everybody has Ticktr installed in their phones, and they're aware that we use local e-commerce credit card processing. When Eddie asked me to present on our experience implementing this in an app, this particular picture came to mind. It's a challenging process, and if any of you all have you'd know that it's not so challenging technically, but from a process point of view, there are some frustrations that you'll have to get over, and I'll touch on that a little bit in this presentation. So Eddie talked on this a little bit already, so I'll skim over this, but these are the major players when you are trying to accept a credit card online. And this applies if you're trying to do it locally or internationally. So the first step is the cardholder goes to a website or an app, enters their credit card on a website. The website will then make calls to the payment gateway. In this case, this is FAC, First Atlantic Commerce. FAC will contact the merchant bank, which would be the bank that you are tied into, whether it's FCB, RBL. From that point, they would issue a request to the credit card network. So if you're using a Visa or MasterCard, they would make a call to the credit card network, which would then in turn make a call to the cardholder's issuing bank. From this point, the calls are propagated all the way back to the cardholder with a yes or no. The card has sufficient funds, and the transaction was successful. In our case, our payment gateway is First Atlantic Commerce, which I'm sure most of us know about. They're a payment processor, a payment gateway based in Bermuda. Our merchant bank is First Citizens, and we currently accept Visa and MasterCard, both debit and credit on Ticktr. So in order to set your business up to accept payments online locally, here are some prerequisites. You need to register your company locally. To do this, you need to engage with a lawyer so he can work with you to establish bylaws of your business. It's more complicated if you have more than one owner. Say you have a couple directors, you'd need to come up with certain laws and procedures. If one director was to drop out, how would those shares be distributed to the rest of the directors? Point, you'd need to create a merchant of account with the bank. So for instance, if you are working with FCB or you're working with RBL, you would need to create a bank account. Funds would be deposited into. You'd also need to show a proof of income over a certain threshold to be qualified and credit card processing. I highlighted this and put this in red because I know that this is a barrier for most startups. Remember off the top of my head what the threshold was. Established our business, but it was fairly high. And we've received a lot of feedback from the community saying that this is a huge barrier to the next thing, you need to come up with a category of products / services that you want to sell online. So for us, I believe it was entertainment because we're selling movie tickets over your phone. From this point, once you're approved, the bank will put you in contact with their payment gateway. And from my knowledge, I believe all the local banks do deal with First Atlantic Commerce. And just to go over like our timeline, we developed Ticktr over 8 or 9 months, I believe, before we launched. Most of that time, I believe like 4 or 5 months was actually spent implementing the payment flow. So it wasn't technically challenging too much because FAC has great documentation, but what it was, there was some challenges dealing with the banks, making sure we had the correct payment flow, presenting data that the credit card information will always be secure. The bank very closely. So that process took a fairly long time. Integration with the payment gateway now. Once you get the API docs from First Atlantic Commerce, you'd need to either hire a developer or maybe do it yourself. This step really means is that through your website or your app, you'd need to make API calls to the payment gateway when a person enters their credit card. And I mean, banks in terms of like First Citizens or RBL may require a demo of your website or app before they give final approval. Because at the end of the day, switch whether they're going to accept cash into their account from FAC. So they'll be the last ones to actually sign off on the flow. So top concerns are, of course, credit card fraud. Credit card fraud could be that someone has got your credit card number and they enter this on Ticktr, and then we issue tickets because the payment gateway says everything is fine here. You can go ahead and issue the ticket. Then the actual cardholder sees a charge on their credit card statement that they didn't make. They call up the bank and say, we didn't make this charge, please reverse it. So what happens now is that we are left in a position where we have shipped the goods, or we've given the service, we've received payment, and it's pulled from under the, so what usually ends up happening, there's some sort of charge that the bank makes to us. So that's not good. Another thing the banks are concerned about is the security of the cardholders, obviously. Secure with how you handle people's credit card data. And I'll explain how First Atlantic is. The last thing is kind of connected to fraud. What is the likelihood of chargebacks? So this is a little different in that a person may actually enter their credit card info and receive the ticket. You can call the bank and say, hey, you know what? Just because I didn't want the service, I made a mistake. And usually the banks are pretty good. Refund the cardholder, and then you're left with having issued the service and not received payment. The fee structure is 2.5% to 3.5% per transaction. This usually goes to the bank. So for instance, First Citizens or RBL will take this amount per. Then First Atlantic Commerce, which is the payment gateway, will take about 30 cents action. First Atlantic Commerce also, but this comes at an extra cost per transaction. What I wanted to do for the last two slides is just kind of go over some of the benefits that we've seen with local e-commerce, and then go over some of the disadvantages. So one of the big things dealing, all funds are deposited into your local merchant account. What this means is that we don't, for instance, if you deal with Stripe or national payment processor, you'd usually have to transfer your funds down to Trinidad and usually incur some sort of like fee. The other thing is that we don't, you're able to accept local currency in TTD. For instance, if you're dealing with Stripe, you would need to accept in USD. And I do believe Stripe has an option of accepting in your local currency, but I think they charge an extra fee for that as well. Locally, you avoid those fees. Also, local tax rules apply, which tend to be a lot simpler than if you're dealing in. And you're able to have a face-to-face relationship with the bank, which is pretty big. Go into the bank and talk to the people you know, who control your account. So that's pretty big for us, and it's something that you don't have if you're dealing with bank. So some of the disadvantages. So most banks down here require a hosted payment page. And what I mean by this is when it comes time to enter your credit card on the app or website, you're usually taken to a page hosted on the bank's website. And they do this so that they can be sure that you deal with the credit card data in a safe manner. By hosting on their servers, they're able to assure that the page is encrypted and they're PCI compliant. So one of the disadvantages is the have that many features than the such as Stripe. For instance, the developer API and dashboard aren't as so, for instance, subscriptions are a lot easier to be dealt with on Stripe. On Stripe, you're able to see when funds are deposited into your account. The dashboard is just a lot more rich, and you're able to get a lot more reports than the local payment gateways. So there is a high barrier to entry for startups, and that's why I highlighted the bullet points on the previous slides. You need to prove that you're making over a certain amount to actually qualify for this. So disadvantages. And this point here, the approval process is usually very slow. At least when we dealt with the bank a couple of years ago, we had a lot of challenges with communication. It probably didn't help that I was away for most of this. Banks tend to be a little slow in responding to emails. So the approval process took quite a while for us. Yeah, so if we're taking questions now, but it would be great to hear your feedback. And also email me if you've had experience. Email me if you are going to be.
Hi, Matthew, thanks for the presentation. Yes, indeed. If anybody has questions for you, let's take them now.
Yeah.
There's a question.
I don't know if, while we collect anything from anybody, Matthew. You referred to Ticktr as one of the services that you've facilitated. That's a very unique kind of service. You could have also decided to sell shoes or sell carnival costumes or any number or any types of products and services. My question is, in your view, what are services or products that lend themselves well to e-commerce in TNT?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I've thought about this quite a bit. What we tend to do from our point of view is we try to build services that don't have a lot of dependencies.
I hope you heard that, Matthew, because that was a long question and I'm not hearing you.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me now? Maybe I should stop screen sharing. Can you hear me now?
You still there?
Hear me?
I could hear Matthew's response.
Sounds like you're muted, Matthew.
Can you hear me?
Can you say that again? I think it was a problem on my side.
So I'm going to go ahead and answer.
Sorry about
yeah, no, I think it's a great question. And we've thought about this quite a bit. Is focus on building out platforms that don't have a lot of dependencies. And what I mean by that is, for instance, if you were, we tend to focus on convenience products, right? So for instance, convenience fee. And we deal with one person, which is Movietown right now. So in terms of development, we can focus on development and not have to worry about like and other partners. So it makes us the latest product that we've launched is a product called M that allows people to do is purchase their carnival costumes online. So again, you can see a sort of a trend where we deal with one partner and we're able to provide their service to everybody and charge a convenience fee. Kind of like compare this or contrast this to, for instance, Reach or Uber, right? Where you have a technology platform that pay for a service, but the service is fairly complicated in its own right, right? You have to manage the logistics of like your drivers, your riders. So there's as well. We tend to stay away from that from our on simpler service to our users, if that makes sense. So in summary, I would say it's worked out well for us. That may not be everybody's business model, but from a developer point of view and people who are interested in more engineering and coding, it works out well for us.
Great, thanks. So I think we'll move on to the next presenter unless there are questions. So let me take over the screen again. Restrict this here. Right, so our next presenter, Robert Degan, has been very active in the digital marketing, social media, innovation space. He has been involved in some projects, as you can see here, Tribal, SCG Digital, and more recently, well, as far as the public knows, in any case, more recently on the Reach project. Sorry, I think you may not have seen that screen. Right, Reach, which is very topical these days with Uber coming in the country. So I'm sure Robert's going to have lots to tell us about his experience in setting up this service. Robert has used foreign facilities, whereas Matthew referred to his experience mostly with First Citizens Bank and First Atlantic payment processor. Robert has a different experience using different services. So I'll pass the presentation on to Robert so he can tell us more about his experience.
Okay, thank you very much, Eddie. So as Eddie said, I'm very much on the opposite end of Matthew's experience. I'm not a developer. I'm more of a marketing person. I work in the digital realm, so I'm fairly familiar with it, but my experience is sort of obliquely different to Matthew's. So just to introduce, Reach is what got me into the e-commerce play. It's an app that allows you to select from a network of taxi drivers to go where you want, at the price you want, in what you want, and how you want. Very similar to Uber. It was built at the understanding at the time that Uber didn't have an interest in the market, as we can now see that's not the case. All right, so we had to, I had the option of accepting cash, and I decided to go strictly credit card for a few reasons. The reasons on the screen right now. Efficiency, safety of the drivers was paramount, not having them with a lot of cash on them, driving late at night, picking up people, and security. It was much more secure for the customers. If they had an issue, we could refund it. And again, it goes back to efficiency. Everything that we could have done could now be automated. So I actually spoke to Matthew about what our options were. He told me about First Atlantic Caribbean, and after sort of running through his experience with him, I decided to explore other options. And through through an acquaintance, he introduced us to Wesley Gervais. They ran us through what it took to set up Stripe and Payoneer. So the options we had available internationally, first off, starts with the most ubiquitous one, PayPal. At the time, PayPal, and I think this is still the same, but PayPal requires both buyer and seller to have a PayPal account. They also have a 21-day processing time for payments for our situation, which is international. And they also charge a 5.5% service charge, which is huge compared to conventional systems. For example, Links or credit card, which is around 2 to 3%. Now, there is, in the works, Stripe is working on something for people like us, people outside of the Caribbean, well, outside of the US that want a credit card processor that's a lot easier to set up, very sort of plug and play. And their play in this scenario is a product called Stripe Atlas. It's not currently available. It's in beta. They're testing it out. And effectively what they do is they charge you a 500 US setup fee and then a 500 US annual fee. And what that does is it sets up your corporation in Delaware in the US. But as Matthew alluded to, that's kind of scary for a startup. It's different from when, okay, you're a business, you've established, you have, you know, clear ideas of where your revenue streams are looking at, but you've never made a cent and you really don't know what's going to happen in the next 18 months with regards to your business. 1,000 US is pretty expensive to sink into a maybe, especially if it introduces you to US tax codes. Having to we follow did Stripe directly, and my situation is a little bit unique in that we were able to use a Canadian address. I used a family member's Canadian address with their permission, of course, to link the Stripe account to that person and that address. So outside of that issue, Stripe is fairly easy to set up. It's well documented. I spent some time, as again, I'm not a developer. In the time that our developer had to add it into our system, it took about 3 weeks of implementation and development, which compared to Matthew's implementation time of a few months, granted Matthew had his other issues, it really worked for a system like ours, which required a lot more. Our system required, we wanted to get up and running as quick. Whereas Matthew had a little bit more time on his hands and that he could go through that process. With regards to, so Stripe processed the payment, but Stripe does not hold the cash. They hold it temporarily, but they are not a bank account. And the next step was that Stripe needed a US, UK, or Canadian bank account to deposit into. And that is where Wesley Gervais pointed me in the direction of Payoneer. Now, Payoneer is exactly what I have on the screen. It's a virtual account that comes attached to a Visa debit card. It works seamlessly with Stripe. I was able to integrate, once we had set up Stripe, I was able to integrate the Payoneer account with Stripe in a couple hours. I was just reading through the website, copying the address information of the bank, sending it over. Payoneer sends you a physical debit card that you can swipe at any ATM, use it anywhere in the world. And the setup time in 2 to 3 weeks is really, once you set up with Payoneer, they actually create the card and mail it out to you. So that's the mailing time. Aside from that, it's a quick and dirty way to get up and running, accepting credit card payments without a lot of red tape. To speak a bit about Stripe and what Matthew had said earlier, being PCI compliant is a huge thing. Being able to hold credit card information and things like that is difficult for startups. Stripe takes a lot of that issue away, and so does PayPal, but they make sure that we're not liable, we don't have those issues. So with regards to the cash flow, I kind of alluded to it earlier, but the customer pays in-app, and that's something that we also wanted to make sure that we could facilitate. It's a good, to us, it's a better user experience to not have to leave the app to pay. So they pay in the app facilitated by Stripe. Stripe holds the payment for 2 days, after which it's released into the Stripe account. And then we can either automatically transfer it or transfer in tranches as we need to the Payoneer account. From there, I can swipe the card, I can pay for things online, I can use it just like any other regular credit card. With regards to fees, it's a lot cheaper to get up and running. Stripe has no setup or monthly fees. They charge a simple 2.9% plus 30 cents on every successful card charge. With regards to Payoneer, it's a little bit more expensive. There's an annual fee of about 30 US. ATM withdrawal fee, balance inquiry fees, general fees that you would associate with having a card. right? The currency conversion fee is up to 3.5%. So if I was withdrawing from US into TT dollars, I would lose 3.5% on the transaction. Now, the drawbacks to the options that we had before were that both Stripe and PayPal require a US, UK, or Canadian address. It's not everyone is going to have one. Not everyone is going to be able to be that flexible. And similarly, they require a US, UK, or Canadian bank account. We were able to link it to my aunt's place in Canada, but it's obviously not going to be the ideal situation for everybody. It is not ideal right now, but it is the quickest way that we can get up and running, accepting credit card payments, to grow a business as a startup that is selling a service, as opposed to what Matthew had said, where they're selling for someone else. They're facilitating for someone else. But in my mind, I just, without digressing too much, this isn't the solution that we want. As Eddie had said earlier, there's a very low credit card penetration in the country. It's 15%. And I think that we attacked the problem backwards, because once we had launched Reach, we realized people were saying, well, can I pay with links? Can I pay with my debit card? And there's no physical way for us to do that, because there's no there's no credit card numbers on these debit cards, right? It doesn't solve the issue of the general debit card holding public being able to pay online, inverted commas, for goods and services. So the keys that we really think are, well, the things that we think are key to really expanding e-commerce in Trinidad would be to make it universal. If we were able to upgrade local debit cards to Visa or MasterCard debit cards, I think that would open up the market a lot more. Make it safe. I know there's legislation to protect customers, but if the banks were perhaps willing to introduce more protections, and then make it fast. I think one of the issues a lot of SMEs in Trinidad have are fulfillment. Even if they were able to accept credit card payments and get payments to sell T-shirts and jams and pepper sauce and all these things, being able to fulfill those deliveries in a matter of days. You know, Trinidad is not that big. We could have next day delivery for everything, but they're not. That infrastructure hasn't really been set up yet. So that's my thoughts on, and my thoughts and my experiences on e-commerce and developing the platform in Trinidad and Tobago. If you have any questions, that's my email. Please reach out to me. I'm more than willing to talk about it. I'm going to hand you over to Eddie now, unless there's any questions.
Thanks, Robert. So do we have any questions from anybody here? So as Robert mentioned, Matthew as well, after this session, you'll be encouraged to reach out to these guys for any questions or ideas or concerns that you have. I'm sure they'll be more than happy to share their or give you some support and some direct you to people that may be able to help if you have such projects. I have a question for you, Robert. Similar to what I asked Matthew, in your mind, are there products or services that may be more suited to online payments or e-payments in Trinidad and Tobago?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, but suited versus needed is what I think. You know, when I look at what's being bought online in the US and other places, you can sell anything. I would say the most immediate thing would be FMCG things, fast-moving consumer goods, so grocery items, and some people have been using that. Actually, Market Movers, who recently won an award for Best Emerging Business, I think it is, have been doing that e-commerce, selling fresh vegetables and things like that direct to consumer, and they've worked out their entire infrastructure, being able to pay delivery in the next day or next 2 days. I would say FMCG, and then perhaps, maybe, fingers crossed, being able to pay government different fees for renewing licenses and passports and birth certificates would be a great next step. So that's my thoughts.
So you're referring to convenience, and you say people will pay a premium for services or products that are not easy to get or inconvenient to get otherwise.
Definitely. I think I see a lot of opportunity with convenience services. I mean, Uber, for example, is a convenience service. They're selling the convenience. Market movers are selling the convenience of not having to go to maybe perhaps different grocery stores if you want to get certain things. And Ticktr is selling the convenience of not having to line up in the line. Maybe not getting the tickets for that movie that you wanted to see because you were late in the line or whatever. There's definitely, I believe it's called the Western dilemma, where some people who have more money than they have time, and they're willing to pay the premium for the convenience. So definitely convenience would be the number one thing.
We have another question from the audience. The question is, and this is a tricky question, so good luck with that one. Why do you believe this payment option hasn't taken off, especially in government services?
At risk of alienating some people who listen to this, I think it's fundamentally a lack of understanding. I think there may be some persons who are in the positions to make these changes who don't fully understand sort of how it can happen and how to make it happen and how to make it safe. And with that lack of understanding comes a fear, and the banks are well within their right to be risk averse. But it then leaves the door open for companies like Stripe to come up with Stripe Atlas. You know, they've got to have done their SWOT analysis and seen there's a huge opportunity to facilitate credit card payments that just isn't happening. You know, I think Trinidad is actually behind quite a few countries in mobile payments, just in general. I mean, in Haiti, it came about as a necessity. And we just haven't, I guess, had that necessity to push that through.
I think you handled that question pretty well, given the unique risk. Matthew, any feedback on that same question? You're not going into topic of legislation and things like that.
I can barely hear you.
I'm sorry. Without going into the matters of legislation policy, any thoughts on what's holding us back as a country to facilitate more payment options?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely tend to agree with Robert. And I think move slow. They're very risk averse. It's people's money that they're dealing with. And yeah, I've talked to quite a few banks, and they're very hesitant to on board. You know, whereas Stripe kind of encourages it, structure in place to support startups. You know, standpoint, I think we need a leader to really push that agenda, you know. But I was telling Eddie, we were having a discussion the other night. I believe that there's a chicken and the egg problem, in that anybody locally has really proved that there is a huge market here. I mean, we've seen it in the States, we've seen it everywhere else, but the question still looms in Trinidad and Tobago: can there be like a killer app? Right, like Uber. Uber's worth around $60 billion. In Trinidad, can we come up with a killer app that really puts makes it such that banks open their eyes and be like, oh, this is something we need to get on right away. And I'm not sure, but it's probably going to happen with a bunch of small wins. And I think that's why these Hangouts are so important, to encourage developers to get out there and start to make stuff. We're not going to get, but I think it's going to happen through smaller apps coming out and seeing what's available. Robert and Eddie also point at a really barrier as well, where there's 15 to 20% credit card penetration. That needs to go up if we're going to have any sort of online.
Great, thanks for the feedback. So we'll move on to conclude this webinar with some conclusion of some of the statements that were made today. Let me see if this is well presented. There you go. Okay, you should be seeing this. So conclusion, well, as Matthew and Robert have indicated very clearly, platforms are available locally and abroad. We certainly have the technical resources in Trinidad to facilitate connection to these platforms. But there's a challenge, which is there are costs involved in setting up e-commerce business. There are setting up costs and maintenance costs and transactional costs, as they've mentioned. And we are in a small market. So those are important things to consider. And as a result, we shouldn't probably, or any entrepreneur should try not to limit him or herself to Trinidad and Tobago alone. We should always think of the region. We should always think of the larger picture to access a larger market. Also, as Robert pointed out just now, that you have to solve a problem for your service or product to be successful. Again, because of the costs involved and because of the relatively small market, if you don't solve a problem, you become a commodity, or you become, our market is so small that you're not going to get any volume. And then if you make sure that your product lends itself to online sales because of its convenience, because of the fact that it has, say, high margin that you can afford to squeeze a little bit, take care of all the costs involved and the marketing required, then you're putting the chances on your side. We have really a unique opportunity in Trinidad, as Robert and Matthew mentioned. The market is wide open here. This really hasn't been any serious play in that space, and I think everybody is looking at each other, hoping that, as Matthew called it, the chicken and an egg situation gets resolved. We're also very uniquely positioned. We are geographically, we have access to quite a lot of markets. The language, the skills of our population allows us to think big, potentially. I mean, I know there's some challenges with dealing with banks in this context, but I'm looking at it another way, which is, well, all banks now are competing for merchants to develop their e-commerce sites. So I'm expecting, and I think we're seeing it already to an extent, a bit more competition, and banks are a little more aggressive in this space. Again, that's an optimistic view. And all businesses in the country are definitely looking for new ways to expand their market, get access to US funds, get access to new revenue streams. So again, for a developer or for an entrepreneur, there are opportunities to facilitate local business and extend their services and products to online market. Good. I want to thank again everybody who has helped today, particularly Matthew and Robert for their presentations. Ulrich in the background has helped us with coordinating technology and so on. And everybody who's seen the presentation, we hope you get to share it. We'll send the link to everybody who registered. And again, all the contact information of the participants are in the description on YouTube, so feel free to reach out to the guys. And I also wanted to give a quick sneak preview on an event that is hosted by the committee, the ICT Pro TT committee, the ICT committee of the Chamber, the TT Chamber of Commerce. We have a networking event scheduled for Thursday next week at 2 p.m. Stay tuned for that. Basically, we will be having a social gathering somewhere on Arapita Avenue where we can discuss a topic that is very relevant to this conversation. We'll share that information via our LinkedIn, Twitter pages, as well as our accounts, as well as email everybody who participated or registered today. So stay tuned for that, and we hope to see you all there. So with that, I'm going to conclude and thank again everybody, Matthew and Robert, and let's keep rocking. Let's keep moving.
Thanks, Eddie.